so we're gonna go to eliminate the automatic ag classification.
It will be only as hard as we make it.
Because the subject's pretty easy. Who's running this show up there? You or Bryce?
Bryce.
Gotcha.
So I think the question, one of the questions on this one is. Everybody has to apply. If they don't meet the qualifications for whatever reason. Are we creating a new class of recreational property? Are we? What are we doing there? That's how we wrote this. And so then we didn't know if. There was a number of acres that needed to be met before you became that recreational classification, or if it was just all acreage, or. So that's kind of the discussion that we need to have here. Are we creating a class to call them something? What kind of tax rate will it have, or do we just call it residential? Tract land and
Just to make things more confusing, you have that draft, essentially. Okay, so what we have up here is not what was sent out, because I added another thing in here, which is conservation land. Just to have the discussion, we got ag, recreation and conservation, kept my fingers up for some reason.
Yeah,
Those three things to talk about as opposed to just ag and recreation.
But there was actually a good reason for that. Tony and I had the conversation just, I forget, all these days look alike, just the other day. About, there are properties. And they're not just APR, but APR is a really good example. Really, a lot of that isn't farmland. A lot of it isn't recreational. I mean, the board of directors of APR didn't do this to go elk hunting. But they purchased a lot of country for conservation. And in the process of running that for conservation, they put livestock on it that aren't being sold for commercial purposes. So they're almost that kind of entity. And I hate to talk about one, but everybody knows about that one. That kind of entity is not really, it's its own critter. And maybe we should address whether that kind of critter is treated differently than a billionaire buying an elk reserve or somebody actually farming.
It's highly publicized that the APR or American Prairie is considered the Serengeti of the West or of America. And that in and of itself is a different classification than ag production.
But they're using it commercially for recreation
Yes.
because you can rent a yurt.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, that to me is
Bus
commercial.
rides
It's
throughout.
commercial. The entire thing is commercial because they're making money from being the Serengeti.
But they're not reporting any income
Of course not.
from it.
Right. And again, that comes back down to they're not reporting income probably, and I have not, by the way, anybody looked at anybody's tax return. Because they can depreciate a bunch of stuff and so they might be making a profit, but they got a tax loss or whatever. I have no idea. But it's certainly not a farm. It's certainly not somebody's private elk hunting retreat. So what is it? So we had this conversation and that's why Tony took a shot at trying to define. What if somebody does buy this for conservation purposes? They're a nonprofit or a what have you, and they're doing just that.
I just know Bob's the itch to create a couple more.
Oh, Bob might own a yurt in Phillips County.
My question is, it doesn't matter who buys it. If that's their intent, conservation, they're still contributing to the destruction of our rural communities. Because they've removed cattle and they've removed production agriculture. And if we're gonna encourage production agriculture, we want them to lease it to their neighbor for grazing or for farming. That's what we want them to do. So I think if you're gonna have a conservation class, it should be up there with utilities. That's all.
You just put a smile on Bob's face.
I've got a cousin in Washington who works for the Department of Revenue, so I was picking his brain about this. In the state of Washington has an ag class, they have a timber class, and then they have what they call an open space land classification, which I like that over the recreation classification. And basically, it's land that stays in open space, whether it's for the beauty, for conservation, but it's land that's capable of being, it's capable of being put back into production at some point. It incentivizes them to keep it open land rather than subdivided. I just like the wording open class land.
Instead of kind of,
Instead of recreation.
right, it sounds a little less like you're targeting somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I think that's exactly the way I feel when you say recreational. So, well, you can't come in and buy that and save it for the elk, but really, they can do whatever they want. But it's definitely open.
I think,
Open land, open space land.
but right now, the federal agencies are really pushing the concept of leasing for conservation, right? We're in the midst of, probably lawsuits here. And I don't like anything that incentivizes that sort of concept that we're gonna take it out of production, because I just spent a week in California looking at forests that are in horrible shape because they aren't used. There's no production happening. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to clean up a mess because we don't actively manage it. And so I don't think there should be any special treatment to people that don't have management plans on their property. And that's part of the problem is people think, oh, just leave it all natural. We all know what happens then. It deteriorates and it's much less productive in any shape, whether it's wildlife or not. And so, I mean, I lean towards it needs to be, classified as commercial. There you go.
And just so everybody's clear, we were talking about these titles. I hope I didn't mislead anybody to think we were gonna incentivize something besides
No.
managing these tracts, right? So it was just trying to say, all right, there is a toy, and then there's this other thing. And maybe it's not a good idea, but trying to make sure you have these nonprofits picked up one way because they're not really recreational. Now, maybe they'd all be picked up if they're not active. So that was kind of how we went to this, is to try to make sure and it's just a suggestion, but by no means were we trying to incentivize anything other than
Right, just saying,
economics.
what does it fit in?
Right.
Well, a lot of these easements, pure conservation easements, I assume you're talking about are forever. I mean, it's one thing I guess I don't like about them is they are forever. And so maybe that some of that property maybe is taken production forever. I don't believe it's specific.
It's kind of, part of it is, a lot of them, like Montana Land Trust, their whole purpose is to put it in conservation for ag purposes generally is what that's leaned towards. So the fact it's in conservation, in a sense, a conservation easement, I don't necessarily see that as increasing as long as they continue to use it for ag production. But I do think I'm with you philosophically, 50 years from now, you may find that it starts taking it out of production because you can't actually
Do anything about
change your ag, process, you're kind of stuck with wherever your reality is.
But one of the definitions for this open space is potential for returning to commercial land. So I mean, it has the potential. It's not taken out of production forever. There's always that chance that people can put that.
So how do they tax?
That I can't tell. I wish I knew. We could probably look that up. I don't know what their tax rates were for any of it.
Bonnie, do you have something?
I do. So the one that you added in there was the conservation land. And it says that the definition is somewhere. Can you find that for me? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Is that conservation land or conservation easements? Because conservation easements are dealt with in a whole different portion of law, and this says that it can't be classified for taxation purposes for, to get lower value than what it was currently. And so right now, the way the department status quo, we just keep it in whatever classification it was in before it was put into the conservation easement.
And I included it at the very last sentence
Okay.
there, such as establishing conservation easements. Or requiring land to put back pretty much to the public. To the public, so it's. But again, this is just, there's no right answer here, this is just. What the heck is conservation? I'm making stuff up, literally making this up, so.
I don't like the concept of conservation land because it seems opposed to agriculture.
It is,
So
yeah.
you're not this, you're this.
Conservation to me is non-use,
Right.
period, just non-use.
And that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
I think
that
most
it's-
in agriculture would consider themselves conservationists. I think some would take umbrage to this language saying that they're not conservation if you're in agriculture.
Gotcha. That's a good point.
And, yeah, I think that. Putting on my lawyer taxman hat here. There's different ways that the legislature. Of all 50 states and our, Congress and Senate, they incentivize. Behaviors, basically. Tax credits for buying an electric vehicle, for example, to try and encourage people to buy electric vehicles, that's a big thing at the federal level. If conservation land is something that is less preferable, and just again, not getting into the. Whether an ag producer considers himself to be a conservationist. If ag production is more important to the legislature and to the states, everybody else, than conservation, then you tackle that by adjusting the tax rates. You provide a preferential tax rate to the agricultural land, and you have a different tax rate, higher tax rate for the conservation, stuff that falls into this, not the farmer out there, sowing and harvesting, but rather the person who's buying the land and leaving it alone.
So what if, because this was, again, was one of these things we were just kicking around to try to make sure we captured everything that wasn't a farmer, right? And conservation, your point is extremely well taken. Thank you. Because you're right. I might be a little offended if you said I was wrecking the place rather than actually trying to maintain the place. What if we rolled all of that conservation and recreational into, like John said, something like open lands? Right?
Idle lands.
Idle lands.
It's not agricultural.
How- yeah.
Well, that's what, that was like the very first meeting, when I said we should have land and agriculture land.
Yeah, so maybe that's right, maybe you title it as non-ag and have all these definitions, if we like these definitions rolled up in non-production ag, period.
Because we have different meanings,
Yeah.
conservation does have.
Yeah.
different meanings.
No, that was good point. What do you guys think of that idea? You see what we were trying to do and it was just kind of
Okay.
get something
Ag.
down
With
that we
really
were,
high tax rate.
The current,
Up there with utility.
With utilities, yeah.
Bob's smiling again.
well, the current law is if it's not ag, it's residential. That's
Mhm.
what the current law is. If it's not classified anywhere else, it's class 4 residential land. 1.35%, that's the rate when applied to its market value.
And we can do that. And actually, that was kind of what we talked about doing. It's just saying Department of Revenue is gonna appraise it just like we appraised my house. And that's why we have the RTC bill to get sales values. Now we just, if everybody's still good on that concept, and I'm good to hear anything.
And then the rate is the point where if it seems you're not hitting, where it should be, or it's under as far as what that tax looks like, the rate is the thing that manages that.
Exactly. And of course, that'd be a statewide tax rate, and then the mills would apply to the value. And I mean, I'm fine with that. I think you're gonna, during the legislative process, there would probably be some adjustments made to whatever percent figure we choose.
So is the A and Roman numeral 1, are those just not necessary then because we have ag and non-ag? Because,
Yeah, and actually there's, scroll down, up here, sorry. Got conservation, but you also have up here recreation. So I'd gone through and come up with a definition for this recreation, which is what we talked about, and also as Brandon and I discussed, this conservation concept, which is a little bit different than, thinking of it,
As
farmer,
stewardship.
making
There's a
food.
difference between stewardship and conservation.
yes, there is.
Yeah,
So what if we called this, large parcel open lands? I mean, it's parcels of land, 160 acres, or large
Right.
parcels, open lands, large parcels, idle lands. And basically everything down there, that includes hiking, stargazing, bird kissing, whatever, bird watching, not.
I took bird kissing off of there.
Why do they have to be large parcels? I mean, why not?
Yeah, and you'll see the 160 acres that's highlighted because that's a very open question.
Point.
Yeah, why should there be a,
Is this,
like, your number,
Gonna get tax rate.
there you go. The little, for the three little eyes. Is that the little three? I don't know. C, where you have parcels of land and you changed it to 640 acres or more, to me. It should be of any size, if they're not agriculture, it shouldn't really be restricted to. be-
Good
Well, a
point.
lot of this is kind of built on other assumptions, like if the decision is you're either ag or you're not,
Yeah,
and your market value, then you just want that land to get the residential rate. You don't have to do any of this.
Right.
It's, we eliminate the definitions.
Yep.
We eliminate a new class of property. It's just
and
your ag, you get the ag. If not, your market value, to get the residential rate. It's only if you want to tax that at a different rate that we have to define and put a differentiating factor in there between, okay, this is commercial or residential tract land versus ag. So if the committee doesn't, if it's just, it's ag or it's not ag, and if it's not ag, it's market value and it gets the residential rate, we get rid of
and
all of it.
I agree that the Wilkes brothers should be able to lease 10,000 of their acres to a rancher for grazing and have that land qualify as ag land. But the other 240 can't. Because they're not being leased for any agriculture. I think you should, just because you are an owner of a piece of ag land, doesn't mean that you should have your entire land holding subject to the ag land tax rate.
And I keep thinking back to how many busloads of people will have at those hearings. So if we can keep it simpler, instead of inviting all of these individual groups to come in.
Yeah.
The better.
Say from an administration standpoint, that makes it a lot more difficult.
Does it?
I mean, because right now, we say, here's my income, my property qualifies or not. Now we have to take a 20,000 parcel and you're providing proof that you're using X amount and getting income from this amount and not. I mean, they just.
And then on top of it, we'll need maps to determine what portion of it you're leasing because of the productivity valuation is based on the soil survey, so we need to know where you're leasing that and what you're not leasing in order to get that valuation correct.
So would you feel more comfortable if that size of acreage was defined? Because I don't think that you're really talking about a whole lot of landowners who would be in that situation where they're trying to do the right thing and lease some land back to production agriculture. And then they have vast amounts of land left over. I don't think there are that many landowners like that in Montana. The largest landowner in Montana, I think, is probably the Mormon Church, and all of their land is in production agriculture.
But if we're gonna be in, or if we're gonna qualify, you're just gonna qualify, let's say, I'm gonna use you as an example. We take his ranch and he's, I don't know, 6,000 acres or whatever he has, and he's only utilizing at that time half of it. Are we gonna punish him and say, oh, sorry, your other half is gonna be market?
In what he does, he's farming and ranching.
But
So-
that person is
So,
also
so
farming.
good land practices
Yeah.
mean you fallow part of it, and that's part of the
But
rotation.
what if he chooses not to fallow? If he's just not using it and he's just decided, I don't wanna
Do
ranch
anything with it.
3,000, I only want to ranch 3,000, I don't want to ranch 6,000 anymore.
So
And then,
he attests to it. He
What?
attests to it.
But so then we move 3,000 in the market value.
That'd be
Yeah.
what we're talking about doing,
That's-
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, right, well, but our whole purpose is to incentivize production agriculture. And if you own 20 acres and you're only gonna do production agriculture on 10 of it, and the other 10 should be market value.
But it is producing. We're telling them,
But he's not using all the land to produce.
I think you're increasing the reporting burden on the landowner there too.
right,
Mhm.
because the specialty crop doesn't use all the land.
Yeah,
No.
bring it all the way down on the.
The 5 acre parcel.
Yeah.
Half an acre, yeah.
And I feel like that can essentially put a burden back onto the producer now, because like, for some reason, let's say, reasons beyond his control. He physically just cannot ranch 6,000 anymore, but he's going, okay, I can probably handle 3. I just can't handle 6, so we're gonna punish him. He's still ranching, he's still producing. He still qualifies.
And if someone knows the implications, well, how many are gonna self-report that of
Yeah.
900 acres?
And that may
And
force,
please
Yeah.
put these other 90 apart.
that may force him into selling his other 3,000 because you can't afford the taxes,
Right,
right?
So then,
and it's hard to manage.
so then
Right.
should there be a requirement that a percentage of this vast holding of land is qualified under production agriculture? In order to get it all qualified.
Boy, that'd be a tough thing.
That's
too,
gonna
with
be
audience
tough.
having-
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not working for you guys. So this was something I was gonna bring up later when we got into the other bill, but one of the comments has been, well, we can look at the Schedule F. But it doesn't tell you which land
Yeah.
you got that income off of. It's a total of your
True,
whole
true.
operation. And it's a total of your operation for your own, what you own and what you lease. So there's nothing that breaks it out to those individual parcels. And so that's putting a huge amount of workload on our department staff as well as the ag population that's going to be reporting.
Well, at one time we discussed about, so for the minimum. Production amounts of revenue, they have to make whatever. Is doing it by the acre. So if you have 1,000 acres. And you're only producing $1,500. Obviously you're not using your whole 1,000, well, I don't know, but depends on your.
2021, I might have
Yeah.
done
Let's say,
that.
okay, about 5,000 acres, but, I mean, maybe this just throws a whole nother.
What's in the next
But-
bill?
John had recommended, I think, like $10 an acre.
I'll change my mind.
Oh, yeah.
I talked him out of that.
You did, huh?
That'll come up later.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the next proposal.
Well, and another question I had too, I mean, the idea of creating this new class, whether, no matter what you call it, recreational or whatever, that has a different tax rate, so it has to have a theme. Are we trying to incentivize people to own large lots and decentivize the subdivisions by having you can pay less, because if you own a large over 640 acre lot? I mean, is that the idea, having a lower rate, or are you just trying?
I think the idea for that we can maybe decide on and up for debate is that there be some middle ground between ag and not ag. And either yes, there should be, then we need to create a new class with the definitions of what falls within that class, so they can apply a different rate. If you decide there should be no middle ground, it's either ag or it's not, then we don't have to do any of this. It's just, okay, it's not ag, it defaults to residential or commercial. If it's commercial use, and it's the corresponding tax rate. So really, that's kind of the up for debate currently is, should there be a middle ground? I think there's yes, then we have to create a class, we have to define what's in it, and you have to say what it should be taxed. I think we need that middle ground. So
7 times crazy.
Yeah, exactly. We're just trying to get away from that, right? John had his hand up.
Well, yeah, if you create a middle ground, right? How do you create a middle ground that is, harder to get into? Because otherwise, everybody who we have just been talking about, turning a ranch into an elk farm. A private elk reserve, right? Aren't they just basically going to do whatever it is that is required to turn themselves into this new middle ground,
Middle ground.
Right. It's what I'd do.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
right?
I think.
So we might be solving one problem and creating
Yeah.
a
Right.
whole paradigm shift for a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, and so. A little bit more of an answer. This is both reactive to what we all know is going on right now. There are already these ranches, Brandon was talking about the 11,000 acre ranch that got purchased a couple weeks ago or whatever. It's already happened, so this is just trying to, come up with something because everybody. Taking all the assumptions at face value and, everything else, if that is actually not agricultural land anymore being used to produce agricultural products, then arguably it shouldn't be classified as ag. So that's what this is with the recreational thing, is trying to create something else that can be treated differently than an ag producer. Same idea with the conservation, that's where Brandon and I had that conversation, it's neither recreation nor is it ag, so is it something else? And again, it could all be one big blob, but it is both proactive, trying to come up with what are we going to do with this, but also reactive to, we know this stuff is already occurring. This stuff is not generally agricultural production land anymore, so it shouldn't, arguably, based on the decision of this committee, be afforded those preferential tax rates that ag gets. That's where that little flip is, that's where that little switch needs to, that's where that lands is, hopefully what this committee can figure out.
I like the idea of having this other classification and leaving the land. Idle, I like the idle or the open space, just because there is a potential of getting it back into production sometime down the road. And the tax rate to me should be somewhere in between, residential and agricultural.
Well, and that's where this 11,000 acre ranch that just got bought is gonna land.
Well, then that's,
I would assume, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm not arguing against that at all.
yeah, I
I'm saying
think
that
it's fine.
it seems pretty logical to me, that's where it goes.
That's their private property right to do that,
So
But if they're not in ag, I think there should be a step up in taxes. I'm not saying it should be residential, but somewhat.
You get a volume discount.
So
Well,
the
then-
question is, when we're talking about taxes, really remember now, ag land is valued differently, right? Its definition of market value is different than how we define market value for these other parcels, right? So we could, and I'm not saying we should, we could do away with all non-ag stuff. Say it's non-ag and value it at 100% of market value, what I would pay you for it at the closing table, but give it a 0.0001 tax rate and keep the tax the same, but that's not the point, right? We're changing how it's valued. And then maybe a tax rate.
Yeah, so what we did here is for this recreational and conservational land, we went to the market value, but it's multiplied by a lower tax rate than what you have for residential property. So we, again, just making stuff up, because that's what we're doing. I think Bryce picked 1.01%. You multiply that by the market value, and that's the taxable value that the mills then get applied to come up with your tax bill.
Which is many multiples of what it is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But that, I mean, that 1.01 could be 0.6, it could be, I mean,
or it could be 7.
or it could be, yeah, whatever that is.
I don't see a reason why we should create a different tax rate for the large parcels. If you own a $10 million property in the Yellowstone Club. And somebody else owns a $10 million property in eastern Montana that they're not using for ag production. They're both $10 million properties. Why would we tax them different?
Or change that to 1.35.
Yeah. It's funny you say, because that's where I was gonna go. For the purposes of moving forward, would everybody be good if we just said, all right, we've got ag and we have non-ag? We take this other stuff, all these words out, makes a short bill.
We like that.
Yep, and I agree. How many bills have we seen die when there were too many words?
Yeah.
And because it kind of takes us clear back to, I think, our first day, and I think Cindy said that. She said, why are we messing around with all these other definitions? We've got ag and we have non-ag. And I think that's in probably some notes around here somewhere. We had to go through all these gyrations to get where we're at, but would everybody and disagree with me? I'm just trying to get a motion on the table, for lack of a better word. Would you guys think that's the way we should go with this?
I agree with Cindy.
Not me, but with Cindy. Oh, okay. I agree with Cindy. Oh, Marcus, sorry. Let's let Marcus talk because he signed up a while ago.
Nope, we moved past it pretty quick. But while I have the mic, I think simple is better. And I mean, I didn't get a chance to look at this because you guys were working on it last minute, but send us whatever you come up with that's a simpler version of this bill, so we can review it.
Sounds good.
I think it's productive to have the discussion of another subclass or not, because I think as things negotiate out one way or the other, you may end up there. You need to have some thought process of how you want that, what that would look like. And there might be some reluctance of taking 200,000 acre property and putting it to market value of 1.35% tax rate. That would double the taxable value of Fergus County.
Well, except what it's gonna do is it doesn't mean Fergus County's gonna get more taxes. It just means everybody else is gonna pay less,
Right.
right?
Well,
And that's,
assuming you structure them all right.
well, but I mean, and that would be my assumption, that this change is not now new taxable value, it's just a reevaluation of what you're.
And that's what, I think, one of the things that we've been targeting doing.
Because right now the residential is getting hit really
Yeah.
hard. And I think whether it's a $10 million acre lot on Yellowstone Club or $10 million, farmstead somewhere. That's not being used for ag anymore, it's that same issue. And so they need to. I don't know, I think it's there again, it's an equity discussion about what is equitable, how should that look? I don't think the burden should be carried all by the. By the residential homeowner either. There's a special, there's a special class for ag because we recognize ag is a, lots of inputs, right? It's a very expensive operation, very small profit margin, whatever that looks like. And that funds our communities. And I think that's important to look at is, part of this that we see on a local level is when you take out, these operating, farms and ranches, and maybe they're only 5,000 or 6,000 acre places. They're not all 250,000 acre. But you take them out of operation, that was a family that was spending a lot of money to maintain this little parcel of land that all went into the local community that's no longer there. And so I think that's why there needs to be this, that, they need to carry the load now because they're not doing it by production of new wealth that's still.
And a way to incentivize, I mean, it gets back to incentivization of our ag production. And if people if they start looking at, wow, this is a real hit, if they care, they can look at their options and it would be their choice and their right.
So on that note, would we be good to say, well, we've defined ag? Would we be good to take all of that stuff Tony plugged in there and say, this is not ag? Lest there be any questions, bird watching is not ag.
And kissing.
And bird kissing, yeah. What do you guys think of that?
From the legal standpoint, is it important to point out what it's not? We pointed out what it is, you have to hit this qualification, if you hit this, then you're okay, and everything that's not this isn't. Or do we need to list everything that isn't too?
Including these things.
Right, and I'm
But
not
not
sure
limited
what
to.
the best answer is.
Yeah,
What,
there you go.
what I like about also defining what is not again, it's having the legislature take away some of my discretion, which I don't want in the first place. That's why I was thinking that, if nobody's caught this yet, I don't want any discretion.
You saying you wanna be indiscreet?
Yes. Never been discreet.
I'll take base, that's easy.
I like
I do too.
the part about excludes these but not limited to.
Yes.
There's so many times when that would have made a huge difference when you're standing in front of the state tax appeal board.
But then see how creative they're gonna get after that. Well, this
but-
isn't listed in there, so what do you
Well,
think?
But
It's
not
not
limited
limited to.
to,
But are,
but are not limited to, yeah.
But again, you run into that problem, right? We
Yeah.
can't, and even if you said, Department of Revenue shall draft rules, we'll miss something, and then you're right there doing the same thing, except that I didn't put it in the rule right.
Case where the Supreme Court said, don't understand about it's not limited to.
Right. So I just throw those out there because we could make this really simple. Say, all right, you're ag, which we've already got. And you're not, and if you're not ag, you're not ag automatically. And by the way, if you think you are, you're not, if you're one of those things, you're not. So call your legislator. Yeah, I mean, is that a good way to do this? There's a question mark after everything I said here. Is that a good way? What do you guys think?
Yes.
And again, somebody asked about the legalities that you could probably get away with not, but I want this thing, if we're gonna pass it, just as tight and as few rules drafted by the agency
Cause
as
you know it's
possible.
gonna be revised in committees,
Mhm.
no.
Yeah,
So let's just go back to the 10,000 acres. That half is only in egg, but that half is able to meet the qualifications, then it all gets it. Are we sticking with that plan? Or are we trying to divvy up what is and what isn't?
Now, is that,
on a larger-
is that being addressed in this bill?
I've got a.
Or is there another bill where that's gonna be addressed?
I think that'd be addressed in another one, right?
Yeah, probably, but, I did add this, subsection 10 here. Very high level, again, totally made up, but it tries to get at that. What do you do if you have multiple uses of a big chunk of land that's under one?
So you change that to where land is used for combinations of agricultural and non-agricultural uses.
That's every ranch though.
Then we're not, or we're
Well,
not?
we would be penalizing the egg production if that happened to be in
Yeah, and
one way.
I, thinking about that, I kind of had the last bit in there, the intent of the landowner, this, I don't know a lot about farming, but I know enough to know that you can't, graze cows on the same chunk of land all year long because grass goes away if the cows eat it, right? So you have to kind of move them around. You might have land that sits idle for a while, and it's just kind of a part of the natural farming process that you go through. I'm sure there's even a word that's used to describe that.
Good management.
There you go. That's right. Again, I'm not a farmer. But that's
Primarily,
right, yeah.
yeah, primarily and intent.
Yep, I left squishy enough language in there to hopefully get at some of the just best practices for farm management.
So when we fill out, cause now we're gonna ask everybody to fill out the form that says I am and I attest to, and there's gonna possibly a dollar amount or so much, now maybe not so much, whatever the qualifications are. My assumption would be, as long as you hit that, it really doesn't matter what else you're doing on it. Right?
And that's
I mean,
how
the
it
point
is.
is
Right.
about production ag,
Right.
because, let's face it, that's gotten to be how some people survive is, diversifying what their operations do. So they're hunting in the hunting season and, they might have the ag tourism, or something like that. And I don't think that should take away from, that's just supplemental to try to make it work. As
Right.
long as the ag, as long as the land is producing, I think that's the part that matters. Everything else is secondary.
Right, those are ancillary.
Yeah.
And back into create that situation, now you got loopholes. Everybody that APR goes, it's fine, we'll put 160 acres of crop. over the whole tree.
But that's why I think, and this is gonna be the discussion that's gonna maybe particularly hard to get, is how do you demonstrate? Mine, I always said, I think the place should be at 70% production rate, or something like that. These guys all go, oh my God, I can't do that,
Yeah,
right?
based on
I
who
mean,
you
yeah,
judge,
that's,
right?
right, I mean, but there's, I mean, and, you know, NRCS has models to say, are you, you know, what are you producing here? What should you be able to produce on this land, or what's your AUMs? I mean, there are models for that. But they're technical and,
Well, but the DOR, that's how the DOR value.
Yeah.
Their whole
On their
model does that.
production,
Value.
productive value.
You know what the
Right.
production on any place, any size should be?
So if you've got 160 acres of canola on 450,000 acres, is that truly the productive value of your land? Is it really just what that 160 acres is producing?
That is the
Spread over.
problem, that is the problem with
Spread
us
over.
being able to just calculate that with what we have is we're using spring wheat and alfalfa
Right.
for all crops. And so if you're growing corn,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know,
Right.
we don't have a comparison on that.
And I'm okay with that. I'm just, I would be much more okay if we could take that 160 acres and spread the actual income on that 160 over the whole 450,000.
And I'm with you on that. And I
Yeah.
think that's
And that,
way we do it now.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that works. And, you know, John and I were talking about the $10.
Mhm.
When you actually do the math, $10 is too much.
oh, come on.
It is.
Leasing sagebrush and rattlesnakes.
I'll give you an example of what I brought, and this is not made up, this is how the ranch in our area, husband and a wife, who are somewhat retired, I guess, tired, if not retired, no kids on the place, wanna sold their cows and wanna lease the place out, not work too hard, the 20,000 acre ranch, they choose to take in 600 cows for 5 months of grazing, which isn't a lot of cattle on 20,000 acres, but it's what they want to do. So they do that at $40 an AUM for 5 months. If you do the math, they're earning $120,000 on a 20,000 acre ranch. $6 an acre. And those are the kind of people you don't want to harm. I mean, they've been doing this all their life. They're still in productive agriculture.
And for two reasons, right? Not only is it theirs and they should be able to choose to not run that thing right to the gills, but they're also leasing it to the neighbor
Mhm.
who might
Yeah.
be a 24-year-old kid right out of school or my kid or his kid trying to get going, and they're leasing it to them for a rate they can actually afford.
And what
We don't want
will
to
happen-
disincentivize that.
We all know this, you're gonna make this dollar amount so minimum that these places will meet, they'll do whatever they have to do to meet it, which isn't a lot. But that's the other thing, if you go to these stock or profitability sessions they've had throughout the state, one of the common themes, especially among young producers, is there's no land out there available. And they can't afford it, they need to find land they can reasonably lease, and this will open that up, whether.
Mhm.
And that's good.
But for those properties that are 20 acres on Flathead, who want to call all of their land ag,
I know $5,
$100,
$6 an
yeah.
acre is ridiculous, but
So
but
maybe
if you wanna
have
keep it simple,
a size variation
yeah.
there, but
But the idea of keeping it simple, you gotta go to the bottom protocol here,
yeah.
and that's me.
Mhm.
And
And a
that's
lot-
where I'm coming up with
Yeah.
more like $6 an acre.
Well, and the larger your property, the better the chances are that it's not really that productive. Yeah. So $5 an acre is not unreasonable.
And so let's say you even went to that instead of, you said, but it's got to be amortized or proportionally distributed across all of your deeded holdings, right?
Yeah,
So taxpayer that has 250,000 acres times 6, whatever that is. That's a lot. It's $1.5 million, right? In revenue.
Right.
All right, if they've got $1.5 million in revenue, that means, let's just say this landowner had to lease that much country. out at $6 to get it? Or have we to maintain ag classification? Well, if they did that, they opened up a bunch of grass or farmland or what have you to OSE. We've accomplished our stated goal of encouraging its use, even if it's not encouraging its use just right to the gills. But, you know, having been there, you use it right to the gills, sometimes then it doesn't rain. So maybe that's how we can go about this. I think that's kind of, John, you would agree, right?
Yeah.
Pick a number, amortize it across, if that's the right word to use. Say, all right, if you got 250,000 acres, you have to have $1.5 million in revenue. Got to get it somehow.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
To follow up with you, so what if you have your 1,000-acre ranch down here in Beaverhead? And you have your acre and a half loading and unloading chute up the hill because you lease land behind it, right? That's an integral part of your operation, so as in today's standards, that would qualify, so does that have to meet its own income also, acre and a half?
I would think you'd have to say no. Because again,
But there's lots of parcels, or there's lots of ranchers like that, where their 6,000 acres are not contiguous, and sometimes they're not in the same county. And so, you're talking, I feel like everyone's talking as if it's all contiguous land all the time, so when we're talking like how much value or revenue somebody needs to earn based on size, are you breaking it up, so this guy, he has to earn $5 on this acre and a half, but he has to earn $5,000 on this 1,000-acre parcel?
On my example, I think you'd probably have to lump them all together. And I'm making this up, lump them up all together and.
So it's by the whole operation.
The whole operation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Provided,
In my mind, that's gotta be too, but
Yeah.
you know, your property within the state of Montana.
okay,
Cause there's so many branches that are broken up in.
under one ownership.
pieces. Yeah, under one ownership.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
we're still talking about the income requirement though, and you still have 5 acres of cherries on Flathead Lake. But they only have to make $5 an acre. They only need one cherry tree.
I mean, this is what. I kind of drafted originally is having a threshold where there's a minimum up to a certain threshold and then it switches over. So in this example, I was just sticking with the $10 per acre. So that's where I put basically, if you kept it at the $1,500 now, the 150 acres would be that break even point essentially, but again, these are just up for debate, so is that minimum $1,500? Does that need to change, and then at what threshold, size wise, do you switch from the minimum to this per acre qualification?
Or maybe it's $1,000 an acre for the first 3 acres, and then, you know, by the time you're up to $10,000 an acre, you're 10,000 acres, excuse me, you're at $4 an acre, or at 100,000 acres, you're at $4 an acre, right? I think you can adjust the scale there. You want it very top heavy to make sure you're taking care of.
So you have to graduate the scale based on the number of acres.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because
I
it kind of,
like the
without having to
proposed-
single out a kind of
Right.
entity. If you hit it, because you don't want to do that, right? If
No.
you hit it like, there's not many 250,000 acre cherry farms on Flathead.
Right.
Unless Brian's got a whole lot more acres than I thought he did. So his should be different than sagebrush in Garfield County.
But if it is graduated, then you're even giving allowance to the person who has 1/4 of an acre and he's growing magnificent onions, you know? Okay, so he can make his threshold. If it's $1,000 on half an acre, he's probably covered.
I mean,
Can you qualify as land on 20?
Yes.
yeah,
There's no minimum.
Remind me why contiguous is important.
I don't think it is, but I think that was just drafted.
Right. You don't want, I own 20 1-acre lots that I plan on selling and they're scattered all over the place. That's where the contiguous really the play is. You don't want those qualified, but if we got written on quality. that's
Nope.
um,
Right
Right now, the way the law reads, if it's contiguous parcels, if they're next to one that it's qualified, the ones that are in the same ownership automatically qualify, so that they don't have to go across,
Yeah, so the,
and qualify individually,
the
but
contiguous, how it's written here is for the automatic qualification, but now
Yeah.
that we're not automatically qualifying anything, it becomes less significant.
Yep.
So it should be.
And the way it reads now is how the guy in the Yellowstone Club has a $2,000 value on an acre right across the street from a $12 million acre, right? That's one of the things, if we fix nothing else, that needs to get fixed. And that solves that. Right?
No, is that a chart?
You can tell me no, it's all right.
What's up? Chart, I can.
I don't know if it does.
You don't? Okay, why not?
Because if I can't tell you that you're 4 parcels that equal 6,000 acres, that you're utilizing only 2 of those qualifies as ag, how are we gonna tell the other guy that his contiguous parcel isn't ag, even though he's running it all over here?
I get,
The Yellowstone guy,
right?
so you have his ag parcel,
Mhm.
and then you have his 1 acre, $1 million parcel that's only at $2,000. Well, if you take your parcel, that's 2,000 acres, and you have a contiguous 100 acres that you're not utilizing, am I gonna put you in market value on the 100 acres, even though you're contiguous to your acre?
You'd
So
never
that-
be able to tell, right? No, that's a question. You wouldn't be able to tell, right? That's the problem there.
Yeah.
But this guy in the Yellowstone Club also has to come up with how many $1,000 in income from his parcel inside the gates of the Yellowstone Club, and somebody tells me they're gonna stop John's cattle pot at the gate, so he won't be able to graze there. What's that? Right, doesn't that solve the problem? Is, so in a parcel like the Yellowstone Club, it can be classed as ag all you want. But how are you gonna use it for ag? Like, you know,
It's not feasible.
a cow truck won't fit through the gate.
Right,
Well, but Tony has a great onion example.
So if this guy wants to grow $160 worth or 160 acres worth of onions inside the Yellowstone Club, he can put up with his own neighbors.
There's covenants that don't.
Right, so that,
use is not there.
yeah,
However, covenants don't matter, it's what its use is.
right, but if, I bet his neighbors would enforce their covenants if you were growing onions.
but if we get rid of that 160, it would.
It's the automatic ag.
Oh, it would, wouldn't it?
That one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
The automatic ag is what causes it.
So glad this isn't complicated.
Well, so here it's like complicates more because I have prices, but you know. Like our piece, I get the value from all these grants, so I said, well, how many sales are you gonna have to make a model? He says quite a few. Well, how many sales are there? So how long is it gonna take to get a model so you can put a market value on these parcels or these things that you're kicking out of ag?
well, let's 2 cycles, and so do we, here's just a thought. It's not a good one. You talk to the legislature and you say, well, we're getting these 2 cycles worth of models. These properties will have to be appraised by an independent fee appraiser. And state. Cause there isn't probably that many. But maybe you have, it had market value from an independent fee appraiser and, you know, have that built into the statute where that is market value.
No,
Robert's
we're not
having a
gonna do
heart
that. No, we're not gonna do that.
attack. How else do you do it then?
Okay, well, let's put this into perspective. We're not looking for 10,000 acre sales. We're looking for 640 acre sales or less, because a typical parcel is 640 acres if it hasn't been divided up in any other way. So we're gonna value these parcels individually, 640 acres at a time, or something less than that. So those are the sale ranges that we're looking for, because we're not gonna be able to say, you own 10,000 acres, we're gonna combine all 10,000 of these acres and come up with a value for your property. And then go in there by hand and value each one of the parcels that are in there. We're gonna let the system do it at 640 acre chunks. So that makes it a little bit less daunting of how many sales do we need. I mean, we still need sales, but they're not these gigantic sales that we're looking for. And in the meantime, I think we have to have some sort of a graduated system where we're collecting these applications through a series of years and not all at once. And giving us time to process those. And in the meantime, their current classification stands until January 1st of 2027 or whatever. And then this will all go into effect after we've been able to process all the applications. Rather than having this independent fee appraisal.
So,
Sounds better.
so would it be unfair to say that anybody's land who's changed hands in the last 20 years has to be first on the list?
We were looking at it when we originally looked at it and we wanted to go by size of parcels, so up to 30 acres, we'll solicit for and gather applications. For 30 to 80 acres would be the next batch. From 80 on would be the next batch, is kind of what we were thinking. We were talking about eliminating the non-qual. With the wild west of everybody applying, we'll have to rethink that as well.
So just to brainstorm, rather than having a fee appraiser as an option, would there be a thing to contact the realtors of the state and see if you could get access to just their data of sales amounts and et cetera, that they would work with the state, with the department? Just a thought.
If you don't have names attached to?
Yep, yeah,
That's
just a
thought.
thought process. It's
I actually talked to a realtor earlier this week about these kinds of sales, and he indicated that there wasn't anything like that available. The fee appraisers, I think, have some sort of source, but they're not listed on the MLS either. And so, and a lot of these egg parcels are very specific about having confidentiality. And so MLS doesn't have them. There's no real database of these types of sales. We'll have to gather them on our own. Cause that's what I wanted to do too. I want to play with it, figure out how
Well,
to
I've done
do it.
some of those appraisals, and so that's why I don't think that rings true to me. Just saying.
Yeah, I think if you're in real estate and you were selling a piece of property, you knew how much you sold it.
Yeah.
Not like that information just goes right through your.
Right, but what I'm
There's no
saying is,
central place where you can
Yeah.
go to collect that data.
Okay.
I mean, you're right, I know what I sold, whatever, for, I don't sell ag land, but.
And I know.
But even those who do, on an individual basis, I guess you could call them and say, so I heard you were the broker for so-and-so's ranch, can you tell me?
You would think that those realtors.
And I can tell you what their answer's gonna
What they
be.
sold,
But you
right?
don't, but you don't have to have, like, tell me what this specific parcel sold for. You could just say, okay, what's the sales information from all the things that were
Yeah.
sold in this county in this year, you know?
I don't know how you, to use a common word, how you incentivize a realtor to want to bother to take the time to take that.
That's it.
They're pretty much gonna tell you that
Yeah.
you just, you know, if you're the state and you want the data, go get it.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, the certification process, are they gonna know that 10,000 parcel acre, $15 million sale included $800,000 worth of personal property, and I mean, that's the other things we have to do is abstract and get just what that sales price of the land was and exclude everything with it, right? Yeah.
Well, and
Whole
any
operation.
given purchaser is going to say, you know, I overpaid for those two combines. I know I overpaid for them. Because they were giving me such a great deal on the land, and the whole thing was a package, and so I took it. Well, that changes how the buyer and the seller think about the value of the dirt,
It's no different
and
than
how the state
residential
should think
sales,
about the
though.
value of the dirt.
Right.
Like,
That's true.
residential sales run, are kind of along the same lines when the guy's telling me that what he bought, the boat that was included for, or all the furniture that was included,
Right.
doesn't have any value, even though he's rolling around in a $65,000 boat that came with the house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I mean,
Paid $4 million for the house, I paid $1 for the boat.
right, but that's where the appraiser has to utilize their experience in knowing how to extract that data from the sale.
Right.
And that's how we do the residential stuff and commercial stuff. So I feel like, and you correct me, I feel like we would do the same thing with the agricultural sales too. We would talk to the buyer, and then we would use our experience and knowledge and our, do our due diligence to create a valid sale that the modeler then could use. So.
Yeah, and if
how we
that's,
would do that.
if that's the case, you're probably really glad that there's, a small number of these transactions every year. Cause if, you had to do that 100 times in a given year. Well, how many people do you have working for you?
Not enough.
You would have overwhelmed your system by having to do that much work for every sale. Very,
And that's what we would do with your seats. but
Right.
This other, if we were to get data from realtors, they're not gonna give us that level of detail for us to be
Right.
able to do that.
no,
And they may not have it too.
well,
And
I think that's a very valid point. The likelihood of them being able to give you data that you could actually just plug and play with is pretty slim.
And
Pretty slim.
you know, how buyers, when you buy a turnkey deal, between the buyer and the seller, they allocate personal and real. And all that themselves, and they report that to the federal government, they don't even, you don't care as the broker or the agent. So, and secondly, I'm just, my perspective, being the director of revenue, I have no business or interest in pushing a bill out there, making the realtors or anybody do anything. I just think that's government pushing harder than they're not to. It's just me. I don't like having us boss people around anymore than we have to. But
Well, I guess my point would be, even if you were able to do that, which is hard enough to push anyway. You're not gonna get very good data.
yeah, for all that effort, you really don't.
All of that effort would be, yeah. Probably.
So, yeah, I'm kind of tripping over this.
Yeah.
So are we good saying, all right, there's ag, there's non-ag. Ag is this, specifically you're doing this other stuff, you're not ag. And we still have to figure out what per acre. And we probably ought to fool around and create some graduated weed eating revenue. What do you guys think about having us mess around with some kind of graduated ideas on acreage,
Yes.
right? Because a 5-acre cherry farm is different than a $250,000.
Valuation needs to be,
Is that gonna be included in this bill then?
Well, I think that's where it would belong, right in where Tony's at. Wouldn't you agree? But it seems like, yeah, cherry farm is different than in eastern Montana.
I think the easiest thing to do would just be a minimum and then a per acre that kicks in at some size.
Kind of like what we did that
Yeah.
there.
What's there? I think that's a lot easier than like,
Graduated scale.
for your first 5 acres, lower the amount per acre by $50. And then for the next 100, lower it by $30. Like, I just think that's when you have to set up a whole like grid to figure out what income you need to hit based on your land size. If you just had a minimum, and then if you're over this size, it's
X per
It's-
acre.
multiply your acres by 5 or whatever. That seems a lot simpler.
Does that cover the issue we're trying to make sure that we're not so low that the big cherry farmer sneaks under, but we're not so high that we capture somebody that's legit, but
Yeah, and I also, I don't want to we shouldn't probably discourage the super small farmer, the micro farmer that, raises $2,000 worth of vegetables and sells them at the farmer's market. I don't know, because that's a good thing too. But so I don't know what the minimum should be,
right.
but if we adjust for inflation, it would be what we figured about 44,000.
Cap prices wouldn't keep up with that if you did that all the way across.
But if you're gonna put in a cherry farm, and you can't gross 4,500, then you shouldn't put in a cherry farm.
Brian?
Yeah.
In your experience, 100 trees, how much revenue can you pull off of 100 trees?
How much should you pull off in?
Well,
Yeah.
A good
Potentially, yeah.
farmer.
Well, yeah, once they're, reach their prime age of production, let's say 10 to 12 years or something. Gosh, 10,000 an acre.
So asking for $4,000 isn't a whole lot if they're getting $10,000.
Well,
$10,000 off 100 trees, you figure? Yeah.
Well-intentioned, but not very good cherry farmer and still needs a special. I mean, I don't like the idea that a guy who's not very proficient at it shouldn't necessarily be punished for making the effort.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and no, there's so many factors that can change
Makes
that
sense.
amount.
You're staring at me, Bob.
No, that.
I don't like you to stare.
I'm just sleeping.
You should have tried that in my legislature.
I get that response a lot in my. I don't work.
That's the way the productive system is set up on the average, so you don't penalize the good guy and you don't reward the bad.
Right.
Now, everything we're talking about, Pat McKelvey just whispered to me, now, everything we're talking about here isn't even involving the tree farmers and the timber.
Well, but for the class 3 non-qual, you get rid of that. Those are a specialty crop included in your non-qual ag. Where would they go? Are they gonna go to class 10 then, which is the forest and based upon a productive capacity of various zones around the state? Or what?
Are
I
you
haven't heard
speaking like
any.
the Christmas trees?
Huh?
Are you talking about Christmas trees?
No, he's talking.
Well,
40-acre parcel,
it,
20 of it's timber, the other 20 is
Would be
non-qual.
trapped.
no, that comes into it as well. But yes, I'm talking primarily what you're calling a Christmas tree farm. There are a lot of small, non-qual tree farms.
Mhm.
Some might be a nursery, some might be Christmas trees, some might be, who knows? But I haven't heard any mention of that yet, and that's a whole separate problem for you.
Would those then fall, if they don't qualify for ag, they would just be tract land? Just like any other, because Christmas tree is a specialty crop. A nursery is a specialty
Right.
crop, right? And if they're growing them in the ground and they're meeting that production requirement, which is now $1,500,
I
and the
agree.
husbandries, they would be in qualified ag. If they applied,
Yeah, they
But just
get-
like every other.
just by everyone else. So if they met the husbandries and the income, then they would be a qualified ag producer.
That
I
has.
guess we'll have to see how it gets written out, but.
Well, let's put, and please, if you've got concerns when we look at this stuff, let me know, let us
But
know.
the non-qual would affect timber if we got rid of non-qual. Because then anything non-qual would just fall into tract land and
Anything
timber.
non-qual that didn't mean,
Timber
right,
would be that now just tract land. We would get rid of the non-qual for class 10 also. Right.
that's why we're having this conversation, because that's tricky.
I think that's where he was going.
Yeah.
So that's,
I hadn't even thought that.
Oh,
we were talking about it. But you start bringing in class 10. Yeah, okay.
yeah, we gotta make sure that all
That's-
jobs.
Yeah.
Well, nothing would happen in class 10, but what a lot of forest land parcels are not completely forest land. There's also some non-qual.
Yes,
because-
I have one.
Right. And so that's what would happen if we eliminated non-quals. Unless something was carved out the way the law is currently written, if we eliminate non-qual, that portion of your land that's currently considered non-qual and not class 10 property would become residential.
Unless they carved it out and said accepting, non-qual accepting from class 10, like
Unless
class
you're-
10 could keep non-qual.
Unless you're growing something on there that you could then apply for and then qualify. So if you had a tree farm of some sort going on there that would
Believe me,
meet
I'll
the
get one.
agricultural.
I'll stick them in the ground myself.
But we need to address that, how that group of taxpayers. Because when we started this out, we didn't want collateral damage.
Right.
To our taxpayers. So we need to,
Baby seals with your handing.
we need to figure out how to not have collateral damage.
Right. You're gonna have some,
Yeah, it's gonna be awfully minimal if I'm gonna sign it.
I know, but.
And we need to think about how we handle that, because there will be a lot in the western third of the state. There will be a lot of those guys.
Could be a lot of.
Yeah, and they're not just a little collateral damage if we accidentally get them, and nobody here wants to accidentally get to people like that, or that I know of. So Bryce, we need to figure this out. Tony,
Yeah, I mean-
Robin, Amanda,
Also, they carve out their marriage, but it's the same kind of issue is how do you tell a timber producer from a non-timber producer?
Right.
I asked that question once to somebody and they just said, well, if it's timber. You don't know in 50 years whether or not it's going to be processed.
Well, that's, I mean,
So,
if you're,
timber is timber.
you have a 25-acre parcel and you're lucky enough to have trees, now you're the one in the preferential treatment, even though it's whatever.
Jokes are coming out.
I mean, that's the issue that
Yeah.
we have to think about is if it's just, you have your summer vacation cabin on there and you're.
And
never
it's significant
building anything,
acreage,
You're
yeah.
gonna still get the benefit. So we have to.
So how were those tracks dealt with before nightfall was developed in 93? I mean, prior to 93, there had to be a lot of the tracks out there, they were valued someway. And then once this non-qual came up, that was a great break to slip into.
Wasn't it back then, wasn't it 20 acres or more was automatically ag?
It might have been because that's what the subdivision, remember, a bunch of this stuff
Yeah.
just followed the subdivision and plating.
Right.
And 93 was when they changed it from 20 to 160.
And wasn't there a minimum at one point of 5 acres? I read that somewhere.
There was at
Okay.
one point, Tom, I have no clue about that.
So we need to figure out how to address that,
$3.
probably.
Well, in Bryce's scenario where I bought a 25 acre parcel that my summer cabin's on. And it has 15 acres of trees, that other 10 acres should be tract land. Cause you're not using it in any other way.
Right, other than its trees.
Right.
Right.
According to what all we're doing here.
But the collateral damage is that right now, those other 10 acres.
Or non-qual.
Are non-qual.
Right.
So actually, only 9 of those would be 9 non-qual, because one of them was on site.
And if there is a home site already on it, then those other 9 acres, you're barely gonna see an increase in value because it's the first acre that has
Right.
the base value, which is much higher. So my point is, I don't think we wanna treat the guy with the trees any differently than we're treating any other non-qual guy that we're gonna strip it away from. Just because he is lucky enough to have the trees on there, is what I'm saying.
But the opportunity for an annual sale is not there. And that's why they're based on collecting capacity and value. 5 different zones in the state.
Right. The
Well,
trees
forest
are,
land,
Trees,
right,
forest land doesn't change, that still qualifies as forest. So the 15 acres doesn't change, that value stays at forest land productivity value and the tax rate. It's just the 10 acres that isn't forest and isn't being used any other way that would go to market value.
not on your group. I'm trying to beat them out. Sorry.
No, that's all good. So how do we move on from this? Do we put together another separate draft based on this conversation and try to get it out to everybody as quick as we can?
Yeah, I think what we just need to decide on is what that minimum value is and what the threshold is. The rest of it is pretty much decided. It's just this last piece of the income.
Yeah, so we're thinking about, we'll try to put together a suggestion, which is all it'd be on our minimum and our acreages and our dollars and get it out to you guys as soon as possible. Is that cool with everybody? Anything else you guys want us to fool around with on this draft?
Other than making it much shorter by eliminating a bunch of the words that Tony
Yeah.
spent time putting in there.
No, that was a worthwhile exercise though, because it actually took us a bunch of places that we needed to address. And so it was not wasted, it wasn't wasted effort at all. So now we're on to the next piece as soon as John educates Tony about it.
I came up with a model we were talking about.
All right, good. He showed you how onions grow.
It's, is it super secret?
That was a double, yeah.
Well, it's just a stair step thing that we're talking about.
It starts at, the first acre, I just made this up. Cause what most of this is, first acre is $1,500, so if you had a 1 acre parcel, you wanted to qualify as ag, you need $1,500 revenue. The second acre, you added another $1,000, so you'd have $2,500 for 2 acres. Third acre, 750, so it's dropping, going from 15,000 to 750. That gets you through 5 acres, so you need, for a 5 acre plot, you need 4,750 in revenue. $250 an acre after that, and then $20 an acre once you get past everything, and then by the time you get to anything more than 20 acres, you have $5 an acre. That's
20,000.
yeah, well, yeah, if you're at 21 acres, you need basically 6,205. If you're at 22 acres, you need 6,210. Up to 20,000, which is what I have in here, you need 106,000 in revenue for a 20,000 acre.
That's
That's
reasonable,
it.
yeah.
So what's, Cindy, you probably know this, what, if you were gonna lease the neighbor's farm, what would you pay, but a dirt farm in Ponderay County, what would you pay for a lease?
I'm paying $40 an acre for a 160 right now.
And that's all
Try
in,
that.
right? It's all you,
Yep.
they just said, here's the keys and you do it.
Yeah, write me a check once a month.
Gotcha.
There are not too many share rental agreements out there anymore. Most of them are cash lease.
So 40 acres at least in the Golden Triangle, or $40 an acre, at least in the Golden Triangle.
6,200 acres, $6,200, $8,200. I don't know. Forget the math. It's been a lot.
That's why I went to law school. So.
But it's $40. And that's, I think, pretty average. I mean, I've heard of some younger people getting into businesses like John talked about, you want younger kids to get involved, and so those places sometimes lease for $30 an acre. And if it's irrigated, then it leases for 120. So it just really depends on the situation, but
Giving that neighbor of mine a pretty good deal on that acre, of that rock pile
Yeah,
by the
no
highway in 25.
what about with this stepped up rate, how do you prevent the fake cherry farmer from just trading $1,500 checks over the fence with his neighbor?
How you prevent it now?
Exactly, that's why we're like, it's situation. But having such a low amount on the first acre, to me, doesn't capture those.
But if you went to $10,000, it'd be another swap check.
True.
There'll be some of that.
Some.
That's why you got that AUM thing on grazing on small
For
tracts.
saying-
So we can't get around that. You don't qualify if you don't have 31 animals, you have up to 25 or whatever the form.
Okay.
What's to create all those kind of formulas for different crop you can do it.
What's the penalty for getting caught trading $2,500 checks over the fence?
There is none.
Well, it'd go back to that, the misappraisal, erroneously assessed property.
How do you treat those check? I don't know.
I would think, and if,
Cause we're not in the business calling them liars.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't like doing
I
that.
guess that kind of goes back to what we talked about in one of our earlier meetings. Do you really have the intent to be a producer? Do you have some kind of process that you go through? And do you have a result do you have a result?
Right.
Because of the other two things. Whether it's negative or positive, depends on.
And but you have to have also, will hold up an end tab, and maybe I'm far reaching, because if a small producer such as a cherry orchard is meeting all the criteria for the husbandries and is giving you the check for 1501, that he says that he sold off
Right.
of his 100 trees that make $10,000
And
or
but
whatever.
if he's gone through the practice, if he's gone through the husbandry that's necessary for healthy trees and a decent outcome. Then it's
But
hard to argue that it's not agriculture.
Exactly, but even though deep down to your toes that the 1501 is an erroneous check, and he's really not farming that orchard.
I don't know, I don't know what you do with those guys.
I don't think we.
It's not-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty hard.
That's what I'm saying, like, you
Yeah.
can't tell somebody that they're liars.
Right. Well, you can, but not out loud.
Part of this comes back to the 1 acre home place though, and going to production. That's where you get it there.
I don't think you can fix all the supportive problems, you just do it, and if it don't work, then.
I think.
I-
we're
Start
taking a
adjusting on the
really
fly.
good Stab at the overview.
I pulled up a cherry orchard on Flathead Lake and moved it to a 1 acre farm site at Front Foot and Depth, because that's how we do it. It's a waterfront breakout. It went from $2,003 worth of value to $1.4 million worth of value, and that was one parcel on Flathead Lake. That was a 1 acre home site.
That they were stirred up.
No, I just did that
Just
where the
here.
Oh,
narrative.
yeah. She didn't
But-
tell him she did.
You'll find out.
No, I did not hit apply. or
Something
say-
tells me if it did, my phone would be
Well, I
ringing.
just- Like the 1 acre breakout, it brings way more revenue than,
Uh-huh.
or would shift the burden.
It would shift the burden and be more equitable to.
But for just our region, not for Gallatin County, but for Lake County and Flathead County, it sure would.
But then again, in Gallatin County, where you've got those massively valued parcels right next to the grossly undervalued parcels. Same thing.
Right, yeah. Should we move to the next one?
Yeah.
Before we beat this horse in the
Yeah,
This poor thing's gonna kick me.
Oh, well, last time it was fluffy last.
That's right. I forgot about bluff.
that word does not pick hard.
That's right.
Was anything said in here about how often the person would have to apply?
You haven't addressed that particular issue?
Would that be in this bill?
That would have been, yeah,
Eliminate the automatic.
If you eliminate the
Don't you
automatic,
think-
must apply and how often?
Just think you ought to fill the thing out once, and if it hasn't changed,
Correct.
you have
Yeah.
a checkbox that says this hasn't changed,
Right,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what we do with FSA.
Yeah,
And then they're subject to the audit. if the
Right.
tattletale goes along.
Uh-huh.
right.
That's kind of how it is now.
Yeah, that's, seems to be, you apply once, and if it hasn't changed, you have a 1 box check. And rock and roll,
Or anytime the ownership.
right?
What do you think, Mike? You think with this redo, we'll just do it once and then we attest every year? You think that would be unreasonable?
All I can say is keep it as simple as possible.
absolutely.
Because right now, we know I have to test every year, they fill out the application. And if for some reason the neighbor tattles or the assessor, the appraiser sees it as they're driving by, then we're gonna have a conversation with the home, or with the property owner.
Right.
But I think as standard practice now, there's nothing that says test, and who's gonna say, yep, sure do, and hand it back in, I mean.
Is there a certain period, like, was it 5 years, or is it a mandatory reassessment? I mean, where you actually make sure there's still 100 trees in the ground, or?
Well, in your
instance-
situation, when I was the appraiser out there, everyone got to see my smiling face every year when they were in provisional. And well, whether they were in provisional or not, because of the unique type of specialty crop is unique. Like specialty crop requires a lot more appraisal work than the crop growers and the grazers. So this, you're talking a very small area, and I was able
Well,
to
it could
take.
apply to a rancher too, I mean, they sold all their cows.
But it's,
And-
oh, yeah.
Okay, and so you couldn't catch that every year, but if you come back and reassess and say, where's your cows? And you found out they sold them 4 years ago or something, then but they should have to pay penalty or back taxes or.
You know, the reach back.
Yeah,
And we can do that
Yeah,
already.
we got that.
but is there a five, I thought there was, I guess I'm imagining, this. I thought there was a 5-year period where the county has, no, they don't, okay. So. That's no. Just, so it's just, you're dependent on that check mark, then that's it.
Well, in the perfect world, would have enough appraisers with boots on the ground all over the county or all over the state, being able to eyes on everyone's property. But as coming out as being an appraiser just recently, I mean, I was assigned an area and it was my duty to review that area as best as I could in the time allowed with all the other duties that we have to do.
Sure.
So you're saying you need more money?
We need more people.
That means more money.
Yeah.
The answer to that is good luck.
Yeah, so,
But
but if we do see a producer, and it actually happened to me, where you drive by, you see it's all dirt, there's not a blade of grass, the fence is gone and they're in grazing, they're probably gonna have to be a conversation saying, hey, we're gonna remove you from this classification.
Or ask you to reapply.
Or ask you to reapply, yeah,
Right.
most definitely, we're gonna have a
Well-
conversation.
Sure, and I'm sure there's fine print. I've never had to fill out a single form. I mean, I bought an orchard. It was ag status and.
How long ago was that? Do I need to send you a
Yeah,
form?
well, you-
I was gonna say, thank you for the invitation, we'll be right there.
Never tell tax people.
But all right. But, I'm sure there's some fine print that says, I mean, if you answer incorrectly, it's a federal or state offense. or
And
whatever.
maybe
Not on an ag application that does that.
You know,
I can
and-
probably get that on there though.
So would county, Ross, would it be very difficult to put that kind of attestation at the bottom of the property tax bill? And yeah, you may have, like I get 14 or 18 bills, you know, for my property that I farm. But just a simple check the box at the bottom on the little tab that you have to send back in with your property taxes, would that be difficult?
The treasurer and the state are two different.
Oh, that just goes to treasurer.
Yeah.
So then how do we let the Department of Revenue know? Or how would
It
you
goes to
guys?
your assessment, you'd have to mail us with a self-addressed envelope.
We
from
can
us.
change that little stub that we have on the bottom right now. Change it to ag.
She's thought about this.
That's a
You know-
good idea.
The only people
Great.
I get that they think they need to fill it out to let us know they got their assessment. But
But yeah, we probably have to put a full, with the assessment saying, all right, you
Yeah.
gotta fill this out, just like.
And then that would be every 2 years.
Right.
Which would be often
Yeah.
enough to attest as well, I think.
That wouldn't be a little.
No,
Yeah, circling back, the penalty that I mentioned earlier, I found the statute, 15-1303 is the specific statute. It's basically if you refuse to allow inspection of any book or records when we ask, or refuse or neglect to furnish any information called for by the department doing the assessment, then we can we have the authority to add to the assessment an amount not to exceed 20% of the assessment as a penalty for the refusal or neglect. So that's the background of this, is that there's that 20% penalty that was.
well, there's that, and then there's also the erroneous assessment statute, will let you go back 10 years, like if I attested that I was really a cowboy, but I'm really an elk hunter.
We go
The
back
state could go back 10 years,
and at 20%.
yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people are really aware of that. Because the number of people that we're talking about that we're trying to put the corral around are not that many, I'm sure,
Right.
you know, maybe large tracts of land, but not that many people.
Right.
And great publicity though, to go along with it. Great publicity.
Yeah.
So I've got a question about the assessment. So if the attestation or application goes out with the assessment and somebody that had been in agriculture now isn't in agriculture, do they get a new assessment? Because I assume the assessment would default to ag land when they receive that initially. Would they need to
Are you
get us
talking a new owner or just maybe an owner that
No.
changed his use?
change the use? I took all the cows out and now I don't qualify as ag land with this. I'm gonna be taxed at a much higher valuations when I get a subsequent assessment.
You'll get a new assessment if we change that classification. But until we know that you've taken, sold all your cows, it would still default to agricultural.
Okay,
Did that answer the question?
I think so. Does that give a person enough time to
Borrow some cows.
Yeah, to change their decision.
Well, we assess as of January first of that taxation year. Right, so if the.
So if you sold your cows, all of your cows in October, then we could change it the following January, you'd get your assessment in June. And you could say at that time, I'm putting it back into egg, go borrow your neighbor's cows and file an informal review and we could come check it out. Yep, in fact, you did put your place back in production and then we
You
can.
wouldn't be borrowing, I mean, you just lease out the grazing, yeah.
Right.
Most people that sell
Yeah,
cows
yeah.
just lease out their grazing, it's not like
Yeah.
change.
Right, and that would still qualify.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's the process now. Is if we change your classification after the assessments go out, then yes, you would get this or another assessment showing you what your new value is. Based on that new land use.
Is everybody good with that one? We're gonna obviously rework a draft and get it out for
Yeah.
everybody to look at. As soon as we possibly can. Should we go to the last one? I think it is just one more, isn't it? Don't we?
Yep.
I don't know what you got here.
And this one's the eliminating the non-qual classification.
Of course, this one will probably be contentious at best, but it kind of. If we're gonna do all this other stuff, this has to happen. Otherwise, we just wasted all this time.
Right. So is the average productive capacity value of grazing land higher than regular ag land? So non-qualified ag land has the lowest assessment?
Well, not the
Timber.
lowest, but it's pretty low.
Right now, it's like $55 an acre per value. Yeah. So it's the average of the grazing land in the state, which right now is 0.20 AUMs per acre. So, and grazing is our lowest valued agricultural land, so it's at the average of that lowest class, subclass of land.
And then the tax rate's
But the tax rate is
7 times, so it's 15.12%.
Okay. All right. And then what rate would be similar to all the non-qualified land that no longer exists? I mean, what classification would it have?
It would go to residential.
Residential. Passport, okay.
That's really all the bill does right there, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, this one's pretty much,
Strike.
we wanna do it or not do it, and if
Yeah,
Yeah.
we wanna do it. It's done.
So what's the downside of doing?
piss off about
It
40,000.
increases taxes on.
Do we have numbers for
Yeah, I
that?
got
Dylan?
it. Prices go up. We'll see if this
Just wanna
one
show you
generates.
that.
more.
Just so everybody knows, we floated this attempt last session at the legislature. And we couldn't, this was the governor's office, mind you, couldn't, and Lieutenant Governor Juris in particular. And we couldn't even find a legislator out of the whole gang to carry it.
And this,
It was even dead before it tried to grow legs.
and it was just increasing it from 20 to 40 acres. It wasn't eliminating it completely.
Yeah,
And it was up in 2017 also.
Yeah.
So it's another one of those bills from that 2017 activity.
But I think that at this point, with all of the attention on the residential property.
Residential, yeah.
And
Once those people realize it's on their shoulders unless they agree to fix it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then everybody's been saying, you guys didn't do anything to allay this. Well, you guys wouldn't hear it.
right.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I'm 100% agreement we should do away with this. We need to make sure we don't have collateral damage in
Right.
just cutting things apart. But this one there's an awful lot of inequities in this one.
And we are the only state in the union that has something like this, the only state. There's nothing comparable.
And I should remember this, but our class historian knows why this is here.
It's my understanding, this happened before I did, but. Bob Gilbert from Sydney. Carried this concept and it just, my understanding what happened is subdivision login, so you had all these 20-acre tracts out there that people were. Building on and they weren't in the city and so they had no services. But they knew they were gonna need more road maintenance and more county services to serve them, and they said, well, what can we do to generate more money? It's not fair to put them at market value because they really aren't like buying a lot in a subdivision that has sewer and water and electricity and all this other services provided, so what do we do? And so most of it's just grazing land to begin with, so what just 7 times grazing, you'll get more money off of it, it'll be a better deal than market. And that was probably all the analysis that went into it, and they never realized that you're gonna have irrigated ground that was at $2,000 or $3,000 an acre that was now gonna be at $55 an acre. Stuff like that happened. I mean, look at all the ones in Gallup County, a whole lot of those are out in the, you know, have a big,
It's serious. But that means that what that tells me is that the burden is really on the residential taxpayer. I mean, they're paying that $7 million that they shouldn't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just gonna be a collective action problem, because when a landowner sees that their taxes are gonna go up by $3,000, they're gonna come screaming. And the average homeowner stands to gain $70.
Right.
So the tax increases are gonna be felt acutely by a small population, and the benefits are gonna be spread out over a large number of people. So that's the hurdle to overcome in the legislative process, is the people that stand to lose the most are gonna be calling their legislator, and the average person, $70 is, it's not nothing, but it's not enough maybe to complain to your legislator.
when you figured out that $70, you know, did you just take all the residential property and put that 7 mil? Because some of that's going to ag land and some of it's going to utilities and some of it's going to.
It's the median value in the county multiplied by the mill shift.
When we had the property tax task force first meeting, I asked that question, what would it mean to residential property tax owners if we eliminated non-qualified ag land? And I had to write it down because I would never remember, but it means a $32 million tax relief to residential property owners.
That could be true.
I mean,
We
not
scroll
for-
down,
it would
Bryce.
be 16 million for residential tax relief, 3.5 million for commercial tax relief, and 800,000 for agriculture property tax relief. That actually is.
Yeah, so 44.5 million is the total taxes that would be shifted onto property currently non-qual, so. Yeah, that would be spread amongst residential and commercial and
And then,
central assessment, all of it,
Yep.
because it's lowering local mills.
yeah,
It basically, on average, chips your local mills by 8 mills.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, and of course, it affects the west much more than the east. Again, in Daniels County. It's actually better to be valued on market value than to be in non-qual. So,
interesting.
right, I mean, that's part of the problematic aspect of this classification, is that. It's detrimental to some taxpayers and hugely beneficial to others.
Yeah.
It's just,
This might need kind of a similar histogram to the other one, doesn't it? To show you where the shift is.
yeah, in terms of what, I guess, what do you?
Well,
We do have that one map that we can. It's kind of a heat map that we could play around with, but I don't remember now what the different categories. To change, or I think non-qual is one of them.
It was.
I don't happen to have that, do you, Bryce?
The last presentation.
go ahead, John.
is it practical to implement this shift over time? Or do you want to do this all at once and make the people who will suffer the most, just suffer? Get it over with? Just asking, I mean, I have no idea whether there's any value in trying to do it that way or not, but if you, do this- if you can sell this over 10 years.
But the problem is if we're eliminating the automatic agricultural classification, but we're not ripping off the Band-Aid here. Because that's the intention is a certain percentage of these folks are gonna now try to apply for agricultural status as well.
Right.
And so if we leave even a portion of this non-qual still in existence, then there's still that middle piece that is hanging out there in limbo between ag, non-ag, and now non-qual ag still.
And I believe did TPR state that about half of the non-qual would qualify for ag, in theory, because the irrigator farmers
I mean, that's
choose not
the
to.
number that we've thrown out. Well, I don't know. I don't want to say anything on the record, actually, just in case, because it's gonna end up in a fiscal note, but
Yeah,
my intuition is that if you could qualify for ag and you were non-qual, you would apply. Because you save 7 times the tax rate and you get your home site to be non-market value, which is a huge benefit.
but currently non-qual
So-
value, the way it's valued, it benefits if you're an irrigated farmer and you have a house, and sometimes even with the house, it's beneficial value wise to just stay in non-qual and not apply.
Right.
But if we remove non-qual, it would benefit them even at that 111.30 an acre.
So it's hard it's hard to phase this in, I think was the short answer to
Yeah.
that.
No, that's a great.
With all that other stuff.
Yeah.
It would be tricky. And well, you can see why this didn't get much of a breath when we looked for somebody to. And that was just 20 to 40. But that's probably the lion's share of this stuff is
It
20 to
is.
40 acre. piece.
Again, I think this is the time with the property tax issue. This is the time to show that we're doing something to alleviate the overburden on the residential property taxpayers.
It's not a lot different than what the subcommittee's working on. They're gonna lower the taxes on owner occupied and raise them up on everybody else to pay for them.
Right, it's
Right.
reasonable living no matter what you do here, isn't it? I mean, unless you find new revenue, all you're doing is you're shifting the bill among the various. This thing is shifting the bill.
It's a shift, but I think you have to sell it when that it's a rebalance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Putting the scale.
I like that,
Yeah.
rebalance,
Balance,
rebalance.
tax shift, yeah, I would sure.
I don't like tax shift, I like rebalance.
Yeah.
It's much better, yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's still the same amount, it's still the same amount of bills that need to be paid. And now it's just. Who's carrying more? This, like Ross said, it isn't, all these things might add value, but they're not changing
Right.
total collections. It's just who wrote the check.
So. If we solve this problem, and in a perfect world, if these bills were able to get through the legislature, then the property tax task force job. Is basically done for them, and they don't have to recreate. Or create something that doesn't already exist.
You mean the other one we're on? Well, it's talking about homestead.
I know, but with $32 million in property tax relief. Maybe they wouldn't have to talk about homestead. all of
Well,
those things.
I mean, as you can see from there, it's not super significant.
No.
I mean, in Lewis and Clark County, if we eliminated non-qual, I save $65 on my tax bill.
That's a trip to the grocery store.
I mean, it's true, but that's 2% of my tax bill. So you lowered my taxes by 2%. Which is, it's not nothing, but I'm not sure the benefit is as large as.
My Lewis and Clark example is if they do what their subcommittee can do, my taxes on my condo here are gonna go up 33%.
Oh,
Blame that.
because it's a.
Second, so look at the higher rate.
First,
Yeah, we
their
still
first
will.
iteration is only 65.
We still have more work to do.
I mean,
So that would be any residential income properties that would be.
no,
No,
Unless
that,
they're
you'd have
long-term
a
rentals.
commercial, the homestead, as versus the homestead relief, you'd have, because it's a commercial property essentially. That income generating property. He's talking about his condo for his own enjoyment, because every once in a while, he likes to come and watch the legislature.
big cage. No, what they're doing is if they took whoever applied, they took all the people that applied for the rebate on residential owner occupied, so they got a database of here's a probably the owner occupied property. Lower the tax rate on those. Raise the tax rate on anything that's not owner occupied or long-term rentals. All the short-term rentals, your second home, your
Okay, so
cabin on the lake, all those, the tax rate would be higher on.
the long-term rentals will stay.
Stay lower.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah. They're trying to capture the Airbnb function.
So that's a lot bigger number than this.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as this year.
But this is, if we're gonna go this route, this is what you say, couple percent. You chip a couple percent here and a couple percent there, you know,
It shows a huge effort by the government and the legislature that we're hearing all of us, all of our neighbors.
and you get through it, you get a couple $100 is real money in some instances, you know. This one seems to be another one of those equity deals where it's just, like you said, we're the only state in the union that does it this way, and I think if I remember right, Bob's right, that clear back from the nineties. It was tracking the subdivision
It's
stuff.
an idea that had no analysis put behind it.
It was from the 93 legislature.
Yeah, that's just nice.
So it was easier to pass bills in those days, is that what you're saying, Bob?
Like, well, the chairman of the House Tax Committee carried it.
So does anybody have thoughts on that bill? Are we doing away, are we proposing to do away with non-qual? Madam Chair? Since you're gonna be the one.
We shall see. But yeah, I think, I like it. I do.
Cause this is another one that this is a really revenue interim committee. Has more juice to actually move something like this forward than.
Right now, yeah.
So that Senator Hertz carried the 97 one that never introduced it.
I think we're in a
Oh, the
different
17
environment.
one, the
Yeah,
2017.
2017,
Yeah.
but we're in a different environment now. People are a little more educated now as far as how taxes, how tax policy directly affects them. Even though they, you know, it's very complicated, but I think if they see an all-out effort, and if it's not exactly 100% popular when it goes through the legislature, people will pay more attention to it and actually see that we are trying to move mountains and perhaps we can get this one done.
Well, I think in the end, though, I mean, the county governor has gone now, but if the executive isn't behind this stuff, there's no point bringing it here.
It doesn't say sales tax.
Right. And this one in particular, the lieutenant governor has an acute interest in this whole thing. That's why she's on this, and this draft in particular. She thinks this is horrible policy. The way it stands right now is horrible policy. She's all behind it. And she was personally annoyed that we couldn't find anybody to even try to float the dang thing last session. She's committed on this one, and I know the boss is. So, doesn't mean it'll fly, and this committee is its opinion matters to the administration. I know that very much.
Oh, we're all trying to row in the same direction. Get to our destination. We are taking this seriously.
So, do we have consensus that that one should be finalized? Anybody disagree?
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
So, why was the bill in the last, I mean, it's kind of rhetorical, but why was the bill in the last session, why did he come up with a 40-acre threshold? Was that
The majority of these non-qual parcels are. Like 25 acres seems to be the majority of the non-qual parcels. And so we figured because of the equity mismatch that it creates with 19 acres versus 21 acres. That if we punched it from 20 to 40 acres,
Yeah.
it would eliminate the greatest amount of inequality that was happening at that 20-ish acre place. And then 40 and greater would still have the benefit of having the non-qual.
So, but it's not, we're trying that all over again, I guess.
Not if the eliminating the automatic 160 acre qualification, I think you're just creating an extra. If that one goes through, this one has to go through to make sense.
Yeah, keep it consistent.
Otherwise, you're still then, all of those people that have to apply, if they don't qualify, then they still get dumped back into non-qual instead of non-A. And still have that
Benefit preference.
and equity problem that we see.
Now, the real problem with that is too, if this won't fly, all that other stuff we spent the rest of the day talking about also crashes and burns. Right? This is kind of integral with that doing away.
It is integral, but I think. It would make sense if this one were to go also, but if it doesn't go and the automatic goes away. I mean, this is what the default would be, so instead of having egg and non-egg at market value, you'd have egg and non-qual still. And you wouldn't have a non-egg at market value like we're trying to create here,
Right, it kills the concept.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, it moves the needle a little bit because they'll have 7 times the tax rate,
Right,
but it won't get you to market value.
right.
right.
That's the difference.
And I guess that's something to think about too, is if it doesn't go anywhere. Eliminating non-qual, do we then talk about changing? The average grazing rate and changing that $55 an acre to something different, some other kind of egg
Something
value.
higher than irrigated, maybe. Making it not as, not at the,
Not as
Correct.
beneficial.
not as beneficial, right? If qualifying irrigated land is not beneficial, I feel like non-qual should be higher than irrigated. Evaluation wise,
I don't know. I gotta think about that personally.
not when you're talking 6,000 acres.
Around with that, just with the. The eastern part of the state, as soon as you start getting
Yeah.
up over 55, it starts penalizing.
Right.
people. Like right now, it's just Daniels County that it's actually, you're worse off being a non-qual because of what market value land is worth. With
Right.
that 15% tax rate is that $55 starts increasing. You have more and more counties where you're now penalizing people for being in non-qual.
What if they moved the
And-
tax rate instead then? Like who created the 7 times? Then the guy in 1993.
Like Bob said,
But,
that just to try to
yeah,
increase
so-
taxes, but that.
What about the thought
That's
of
not what
like,
we're gonna do.
instead of not changing the valuation and penalizing the eastern half, just change the tax rate?
It's,
The same
it says the same thing.
And that's the problem is with just the acre threshold, there's no way to opt, say, I don't wanna be non-qual, I want.
No,
to
yeah.
Go to market value, because the statute says if you're 20 acres or greater, you are classified as this.
Mhm.
So as you start changing that, you're just gonna.
Penalize eastern Montana.
Penalize Eastern Montana.
Just-
More and more counties, but you're now penalizing for being non-qual, and there's nothing they can do about it other than. I guess break their parcels a bit smaller. So.
And put them in different names.
Yeah. Break up the county.
Well, their kids, their own.
Create a bunch of LLCs.
Right, and we gotta keep in mind what our goal was here. It wasn't to penalize
Right.
anybody. And, it's an interesting thing being in charge right here of tax policy, because being in charge of tax policy we're holding a very, very powerful weapon right here called taxation, right? And we're not in the business of penalizing someone. We're trying to make this fit the goal, and the goal isn't to penalize, it's to make sure things are treated fairly. And so I don't wanna go toward that, well, all right, you're a non-qual, I'm gonna jack the tax rate up on you. That wasn't the.
Right now, I was just talking out loud, but I mean, her theory of non-qual doesn't go through, but the having to apply goes through. So again, you're still either your ag or your non-qual, if it doesn't leave the table. Those people still are not getting as good benefit as an automatic A,
Right,
so.
right, but that actually meets the policy goal of saying if you're not really an ag, then you shouldn't be automatically ag.
Right.
So that meets a policy goal that is far different than I'm gonna raise your taxes.
Right.
That means we're just trying to make sure everybody's treated right, and it's up to the policymakers to say, all right, how do we tax them? That would be up to the
policy.
legislature.
It is the policy.
Right. And I always try to keep that in mind, right? What I personally think about a non-qualified parcel doesn't matter. What I personally think it should pay doesn't matter. It's how do we make sure we're treating, from a policy standpoint, everybody right? And if somebody, there are examples of things that don't look right, that's what we're here to fix.
What's the collateral damage of eliminating non-qual? Other than some angry folks for a little while.
Well, I think they're angry because they just got a bigger tax bill,
Mhm.
which would chat me. Pat, we do have some public comment time. Pat, that's a question really that you could address in public comment, because Cynthia's asking a real question here. A very important question.
And that's how the elimination affects some of the landowners.
Yes.
Well, I can only speak for the small tree farm people, because that's who I here represent. Of the 28,000, over 28,000 forest landowners, quite a few of those will be impacted as well. It's because we're talking non-industrial private forest land. We don't have the annual sale ability.
Right.
That they do on the industrial private forest land. The tree farm situation, the actual tree farmer,
No,
not somebody that just owns a bunch of forest land,
Right.
because that's often confused. Again, is gonna be hit pretty hard. I get the 1 acre business and home site. Somebody mentioned it would be the simplest way if we just say you value that at your tract land and class 4 on the improvements. And don't mess with, okay, if you're non-qual ag, then you get
you
a
want it,
different treatment on your improvements. That is a saleable issue. But boy, the small actual Christmas tree farmer who plants, maybe 1,000, maybe they rotate their crop out of 2,000 trees, 1,000 this year to sell out, because they have to do a rotation or they have a hang. I'll have to discuss it with that group of people as well. Because that's a different group than the Montana Forest Owners Association. I'm vice chair of Montana Forest Owners.
And those folks, the tree farm folks though, can qualify for
yeah,
agricultural
they're
status.
agriculture,
So-
they're ag.
If the Christmas trees, if they're making money off their Christmas trees and they hit that $1,500 gross income.
It's $1,500 now, yeah, but you're talking like 4,500.
Well, as it stands now though, they would qualify as agricultural.
Yes.
So they wouldn't be in non-qual, they would be in
It's still
agricultural.
a specialty crop.
Yeah. It's a specialty crop, but in the 2,000 trees provisional only applies to the 5 years not making any money. If they're making money and they hit that $1,500 gross, they can apply for agricultural and be a bona fide agricultural operation. And then they wouldn't be a non-qual.
I guess yeah, I'm more confused now than I thought I had it figured out.
So yeah, the guy who's actually growing Christmas trees is gonna be in the same shoes as Brian.
Right,
Right,
They get a provisional time too, don't they?
right.
well, there's different rules for provisional.
Yeah.
Than just for making money.
Let's talk about that for a second.
But you know, in short, the Christmas tree person is a specialty crop like a
Right.
cherry orchard or a garlic
Right.
farm or
It
whatever.
is,
So, but now we've got Pat's specific situation, which is however many acres, he's got his house on it. And he's got 25 acres of,
Oh, well, no, not my particular, I got 335 acres, I got both class 10 and.
but how much
class-
non-qual do you have? Currently,
I'd have to look at that, but I don't think it's very much. Cause I
you're
grade.
representing a bunch of people that, when I said, I wasn't talking about your personal land, I'm sure.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know how many, I don't think we've ever
Yeah.
tried to break that down, but it's certainly something I'm gonna bring up, at our next board meeting,
right,
there is no question. And I don't think the tree farm people understand what's going on.
they can always give us a call, I'll give you my card.
Good, I appreciate that thing.
And then Robin had mentioned before the 1 acre, which most force, if you have a house already, your 1 acre is already at that full market.
And
then-
it should be,
Right, and then there's an adjusted rate after that. That the rest of that non-qual would fall into, which would be pretty minimal. in
yeah, I don't
value.
think there'd be much of an argument if it were in the same valuation and taxed as class 4. That would be a very saleable thing for these people, I'm sure. And to answer your question on so most of the people that we have who belong to these organizations have taken a stewardship program, have a management plan on their properties. We require them. We're very, in fact, I just wrote a paper for the Northwest Woodlands magazine about landowner responsibility now and how that's changing because of the fire issues that were being dealt with. And how that cost per acre, $1,500, $2,500 an acre just to do the treatment. Is now really impacted by the loss of the mill and ceiling. Because if you're dealing with a ponderosa pine species, what are you gonna do with it? I mean, we can't truck it to Thompson River. By the time you put wheels under it, it's not of any value.
Mhm,
So you pile it and burn it. I mean,
mhm.
it's not a very good situation.
I'm currently doing that on my own property. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know unless you have other questions,
Answer
but
that question.
Mhm, yeah.
So we should, there's our public comment. Is there any more public comment?
Well, kind of in the same boat, I guess, as where Pat's at, is like, until I see, until we really see everything in black and white. As far as what the proposal might be, it's hard to say. As I've indicated before, unintended consequences are things that we certainly have to be paying strong attention to, because from our perspective, we want to see kids have the opportunity to find land, to be able to get involved in agriculture and to stay in agriculture. And I'm looking at, for example, if you look at a $5 minimum, and all of a sudden on a 1,000 acre piece, you've got to come up with $5,000 to justify an ag development. There's no way. I'm taking some of my own ground out there, 1,000 acres, I'd be lucky to come up with half of it. And that's because I'm gonna be a good steward on the land. I'm not gonna overgraze it. I'm not gonna push too many animal units on it to try and come up with that $10,000 or that $5,000. And that, by putting those kind of restrictions in place, what you're really doing is forcing an ag producer potentially, I think, you're looking at it from a conservation standpoint, to go out and do more than what he should do potentially on that piece of ground. Those are the kind of things I think we need to take a really hard look at before you push that kind of proposal, for example. And then as far as the other concerns are, automatically or eliminating the 40 acre or the 20 acre, for example. Those are all things that are certainly gonna have some implications as far as these smaller producers being able to maintain and stay within an agricultural operation. And allow for those small parcels, for example, to be made available to a young kid trying to get out there and find a piece of ground and take a farm. Or do some other things, whether it's tree farming or it's growing garlic or whatever it might be. Yeah, just until we see, you know, from from our organization perspective, until we see that. All those, how those all fit together and what the proposal really is, it's hard for me to say yes or no, I think you're in the right direction. But we'll be meeting in July. I'll certainly have this on our agenda for our board discussion. And ultimately, then our annual meeting, as it's been mentioned, is gonna be in October. And that'll be where we'll have some really good discussion about it from a legislative perspective. Just from my own perspective, haven't seen these, you know, in the past with my involvement as a lobbyist up there in the legislature. Senator Beard knows this as well as anybody and better than I do. But I think this is gonna be a very tough issue to try and deal with. You know, agriculture, very candidly, I think agriculture's voice up there in the legislature and the Capitol was probably diminished from where it was 30 years ago. But it's gonna be a strong voice up there, and one way or another, this has gotta be something that's fair and equitable from an ag perspective. But we will see, you know, well, I think we'll see the agricultural community come in and force to do whatever, whether it's supported or opposed, but. It's something that's certainly very important in my mind, from the perspective of trying to keep. Availability for agricultural production for the young kid trying to get in, for the old guy that's not quite ready to retire, so. With that.
Thank you.
Bill, is there any public comment online?
No, ma'am, there is not.
All right, so we're going to fluff up these drafts and then we'll email those around so y'all have a chance to look at them over again. We'll try to schedule just a Zoom call. Or do you want a full bore meeting?
I think we ought to have a meeting.
Okay,
I think
They work better in person.
okay.
I don't multitask so much.
You
Here.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Is that okay with everybody? I mean, I got no problem if you're not gotta be on Zoom or whatever, but these things, I do enough of these Zoom meetings
We need
that
to do it right.
Will those be available on your website? I mean, we
What-
didn't get the hard copies today.
Yeah,
I
once
had-
we get them redrafted and then circulate them around and these guys kind of agree that that's what they want them to look like, then we'll post them out there.
And Bryce and I will work on those. By no means are those be considered final.
Yeah.
They're just
Working drafts.
updates from what we, working drafts. Senator Beard said, updates from what we talked about today.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I think the real public hearing will be at the RIC meeting in June.
Yes.
We'll have to schedule time for that.
So that'll be everybody's first introduction to these and put it in the pipeline. That the ag groups can start rattling their sabers to come in, and that's what we need. Because if we can get more activity and a more involvement from those groups, we're going to come up with better legislation for next January. And we can maybe revitalize the incentivization of our ag community across the state.
I think it's an important dovetail off of that is if it's a bona fide ag operation that qualifies. Having the non-bona fide ag falling out actually benefits those bona fide ag operations, because then that rebalancing of this stuff, it benefits. The true ag operation in Montana and just kind of trims the. People that have sort of slipped into the non-qual and, have their 25 acres, but don't actually do anything with it.
No, but there's a thing here, right? The definition of bona fide is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, and that was
we
my
need to be-
my definition of.
Yeah, because my definition of bona fide might be different than yours.
Yeah.
And as we were talking, it's funny, listening to the public comment here, talking about we're trying to give opportunity and for people coming in and young people. Well, that's been over and over again, the stated goal of trying to incentivize using this, what comes out of this committee to incentivize land to be left in agricultural production to accomplish that very goal. So we're still trying to do the same goal, and we appreciate the input because gotta make sure we're doing it right. So I hope you understand that one of the main goals of this right from the start was we're trying to incentivize land being kept in ag.
And that's where we had the discussion as a board internally about the conservation. But a lot of people use that as a way to go from generation to generation. And I personally favor it myself. We've done other things with trust, but some people do, they use the conservation. So,
And there's been some ranches kept in production because of those.
yeah.
Some big ones right in the neighborhood here.
Works for the one generation that does it.
Exactly, but subsequent generations, and that's why, well, and some local governments have argued that it diminishes your property values if you are adjacent to a conservation easement or your land is in fact part of it in a conservation easement. And back when they started becoming very popular in the early 2000s, Farm Bureau brought the policy that we felt that conservation easements should be taxed at the value of the right. So the holder of the easement, not the owner of the land, but the holder of the easement should be paying property taxes on the value of that right because they exercise that right daily. I also have mineral rights. I'm taxed on them if I exercise them. So if a conservation easement holder has that right, they are exercising it every day.
For the conservation easement doesn't affect the taxable value of the property.
No, it doesn't, but the
So the taxes that the government is receiving makes no difference whether it's conservation. Generally. That's so restrictive, it changes the production practices. Most of them don't. Conservation easements are income tax planning tools and estate planning tools, they're not property. Right. Really.
Until the owner of the easement and the owner of the land become the same.
Well, there is that.
Yeah.
How does the week of June 10th look? That will give one full week before the revenue interim committee, or would you like to do it the week before, the first week of June?
Farm Bureau has their, if it's actually on the 10th, it's doable, but they have a board, summer committee meetings, the 6th through the 9th in Iowa City.
I have district meetings the whole week.
Of the 10th. And we may just, some of us we may not be able to get everybody here.
True.
June is gonna be awful for yours truly too.
I can do it the 10th, but that day. But it's,
I'm the same.
What about the week before?
no.
That's
not-
actually better for me.
And not for me.
Not for me.
Do we want to shoot for the 10th? Monday, the 10th?
Be here if you can, Zoom if you,
Yeah.
all else fails.
Does the 10th work as good for anybody as a Zoom or in person? And obviously recognizing that some of us are gonna be Zoomies.
I think if we try to go any later, it's not gonna be enough time.
We have
Revenue.
legislative week, the second half of June.
We'll do everything we can to get those drafts together and
So the 10th is a Monday. I'm looking
Yeah.
at the wrong, no,
Yeah.
10th is bad, sorry.
Oh.
It's the convention in Miles City is the 8th through the 13th.
One of those days I'm gonna be there with you.
Yes, you are gonna be there on the 11th, right in the middle of it. So the week before would have to be. You've got all kinds of other things going on the 5th, 6th and 7th. But when is the
24th and 25th.
is the interim committee?
Would June 3rd or 4th work? Not for the senator.
Property tax task force is meeting on the 4th in the afternoon. And I'm already booked on that morning.
How about the 5th?
5th is okay.
Anybody on the 5th? Any no's on the 5th?
I can Zoom.
You can Zoom.
I might be a little high, but Zoom.
You might be a little high.
Like physically or.
Okay, can I go with you?
I'm just having a little procedure on the foot.
Oh, okay.
She's gonna be very happy.
All right,
Underneath those.
gotcha. Not eating
So I'll
gummies.
just keep it on mute. How's that?
I think I'd prefer that you didn't.
June 5th, going once, going twice.
Sold.
Nice.
I haven't even looked at my work calendar, so I'll be here.
It's what it says, you'll be here. All right,
Is that-
anything else we need to cover before we disassemble?
If we get those spreadsheets with the number,
Well, he's gonna redo a little bit on that, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think it's fine if Bryce sends those out to committee members as they are and I'll be. My plan was to look at market value sites for smaller parcel sizes. So I guess we're still gonna have some kind of parcel level distinction and that aspect if we go forward with that concept.
And then you were also gonna look at distribution, at John's suggestion on the 1 acre. Farmstead.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Oh,
Yep. farms,
I thought you
market
were
value.
talking about the non-qual, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know, was there more stuff for the non-qual that people wanted to see or?
You had the, what did you call it, a heat map?
Yeah. We'll drag that out next meeting.
And I want to tell you guys all, the lieutenant governor walked out and pulled me aside and said, man, this is an incredible group and how impressed she was with all the work that everybody's doing. And I just kind of want to pass that on. So thank you all so much for your service on this project. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.